Good evening and welcome to Friday Nights Live from the Parrish. My name is Corinne Erni. I'm the Senior Curator of ArtsReach and Special Projects at the Parrish. I'm very happy and sad at the same time to let you know that this is our last live stream program for a while. Next week, we're going back to our building with a wonderful program of outdoor presentations, music, film, and new exhibitions. So please check us out on parrishart.org. And I would like to thank our sponsors who make these Friday nights possible, our presenting sponsor, Bank of America, and Sandy and Stephen Pearlbinder. And it is my distinct pleasure tonight to welcome back Tomashi Jackson and two special guests, Kelly Dennis and Kesu Park. Tomashi and I met about 2 years ago, and of course I was blown away by her work. And we started a conversation about doing a project at the Parrish Art Museum. And it became very quickly became obvious that Tomashi wanted to obviously tell untold stories and focus on the lived experiences of people of color out here on the East End or the Hamptons. And in particular, communities, Indigenous communities, Black communities, and also Latinx communities. We were very fortunate that Tomashi was able to come out East last January, just before the lockdown, and actually meet with members of these communities and historians. So actually, the project is called The Land Claim. It's an exhibition that was supposed to open up tomorrow, but because of what we're all going through, it has been postponed for a year, so it'll open up next summer. But this is actually giving Tomashi more time to dive into more research. And as anything with Tomashi, I know it's going to be a beautiful, profound, and generous project. So now I would like to introduce our speakers. So Tomashi Jackson is a multimedia artist who works in painting, collage, sculpture, and video. She was born in Houston and raised in Los Angeles. Tomashi earned her MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale University School of Art in 2016, a Master of Science in Art, Culture, and Technology from the MIT School of Architecture and Planning in 2012, and a BFA from Cooper Union in 2010. She's an alumni of Skowhegan School of Painting and Culture. Her work was included in the 2019 Whitney Biennial and in group exhibitions at Mass MoCA and other places. Her work is in the collections of the Whitney Museum, LACMA, and the Baltimore Museum of Art. Kelly Dennis is an attorney specializing in federal American Indian law. She has represented her tribe, the Shinnecock Indian Nation, and other sovereign tribal nations in matters such as land rights, civil rights, cultural and natural resources protection, as well as tribal governance and business development. Kelly has also been working as Public Programs and Residency Coordinator at the Watermill Center, which is actually where she met with Tomashi back in January. And so Tomashi was supposed to have a residency as Ingemar and Otto Fellow at the Watermill Center this past spring, and this has been postponed to next spring. So here I know our friends from Watermill are watching, so thank you very much for this partnership. Kesu Park is Associate Professor of Law at Georgetown University Law Center, where she teaches about property, immigration, and the creation of the US land system through the process of colonization. Kesu is the recipient of fellowships from UCLA School of Law and the Fulbright program. Her writings have appeared in major publications such as Contemporary Art, Quarterly, and the New York Times. And Tomashi and Kesu met for the Whitney Biennial project that Tomashi did last year, which focused on the displacement of Black communities from Seneca Village, which was then to become Central Park. And she compared it with a very shady government program, I think called the Third Party Program in Brooklyn to disown Black homeowners. So here you see all the connections of the people who are speaking here tonight. And Tomashi, please take it away.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you, everyone who's here that we can't see. Thank you for joining us in the second of multiple conversations around the research for the land claim. I'm really honored to still consider myself a fellow of Watermill Center, and an exhibiting artist of the Parrish Museum, although things have changed in ways that we couldn't have anticipated. I'm extremely excited to be here with these two brilliant attorneys to talk about their areas of specialty, land, property, colonialism, and in Kelly's instance, very specifically a representative of the Shinnecock people and the Shinnecock Nation. I would like to read one of my favorite sections of Kesu Park's essay titled "Money, Mortgages, and the Conquest of America," that was published in the law in the journal of the American Bar Foundation, and the Law and Social Inquiry section. Yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. I think I had other things to say, but our time is so brief that I want to jump right into this conversation with the attorneys. So this is a really brilliant piece that I turn to a lot. It was key for my work on Seneca Village and the third-party transfer program in New York. So I'll just jump right into one of its two earliest pages before I go to my questions. Foreclosure as an American colonial innovation. Although colonists in America drew on a variety of local English laws at the foundation of their legal systems and adapted them accordingly to a variety of local needs, the evolution of the mortgage in America eventually conformed to one major structural change across the colonies. It became easy to foreclose upon land, and the treatment of land thereby approached that of chattel, degrading the conceptual distinction maintained between these categories for centuries in English law. I'm going to jump into another paragraph because we're fortunate to have the author with us to fill in some of these gaps. First, however, to appreciate the novelty of the American mortgage, it is important to note the extraordinarily enduring tradition of protecting the human connection to land in English property law before the colonial period. This deeply ingrained preference was reflected by the limits of the English mortgage. Prior to the early 17th century, when the British colonies in America were first established, it was virtually impossible to alienate one's land through a debt transaction under English law. The earliest European arrangement of using land as security for debts, which had come into being by the 11th century, was an instrument known as the gage. Since charging interest on loans was prohibited as a form of usury during this time, English lenders with a gage were entitled to the rents and fruits of the land. And I'm going to jump again. And then I'll close with this. English laws protected the inheritance of estates across generations, recognizing that the stability of the economic, political, and social order depended on it. To maintain the integrity and cohesiveness of landed states, the laws treated real property and real personal property as starkly different entities and made real property practically inalienable. Unsecured creditors could claim personal property or income from a debtor's land. They could assume possessory or tenancy rights on half of the land for a temporary period and send debtors to prison, but they could not seize the land itself. These laws ensured that real property would pass in one undivided parcel to the eldest male heir. They also recognized the family's collective interest in the land, which entails limiting his ownership to a life interest, and circumscribed that interest with family settlement agreements specifying benefits for other family members. I'm going to stop there. I want to also note that when Corinne and I first had our first conversation a couple of years ago, I asked her what was happening in the East End of Long Island, what was happening in the Hamptons. And I listened closely for a story that I could close my eyes and imagine a similar historical conundrum or event to collapse the present with the past. The first thing she told me about was the common occurrence of Latinx people or brown people being stopped in their cars and arrested, and then very quickly shuttled off into ICE detention centers, and some of them never to see their families again. So she brought me I came out to Long Island in late January, literally January 31st, right before things started to get especially strange. And we spoke with a number of people. Kelly was the concluding conversation. And the first conversation was with Kara Wingfield of the Education Department of the Parrish. And then we spoke with Terry Sultan. And then we spoke with Minerva Perez, who leads OLA on Long Island. And she affirmed so much of what Corinne had been telling me. We spoke with Georgette Greer-Key of the Eastville Historical Society. We spoke with Junie Wingfield, a local native and historian. I have notes, pages and pages of notes from that conversation. We also spoke with Bonnie. I just wanted to acknowledge everyone who spoke with us in the conversations that led up to the conversation with Kelly. My main interest has been and remains the experience of pursuing safety and stability in home, in transportation, and in agriculture and labor. These were the terms and the topics that I saw colliding across these three specific communities of Latinx, Indigenous, and Black community members that we spoke with. Bonnie Cannon is who we spoke with. So the land claim, the title comes from that conversation with Kelly, as she began to open my eyes about the beginning of the history of the land in this area, without which there's no story at all. So I want to start with asking Kesu. I have a couple of questions for each. I have a question for Kesu, and I have a question for Kelly, and I have a question for both of them as attorneys. Kesu, my question for Kesu is, what is the gauge as an instrument of real estate, and how has it been employed across civilizations? How has it been transformed by English colonists as a unique tool of land dispossession? How has the gauge been mutilated by a genocidal lens? Kelly, my question for you is, in the pursuit of safety, stability, safety and stability at home, while in transportation, and in the act of sustaining land, what are key characteristics of the contemporary Shinnecock experiences of local authorities? I'm particularly interested in focusing on the reservation and the roads around the reservation. And I'll also include the golf course, as I learned so much from watching Conscience Point about property that is indigenous, that is actually indigenous land being considered open to trespass if indigenous people actually deign to step there. And then finally, my question for both of you, Kesu and Kelly, who owns the fox? Kesu, can we start with you and the gauge?
I'm very happy
the definition of the
gauge. First, let me say I'm so honored to be here with you and with Kelly, and thank you to Corinne for organizing this program. I wonder if we could start with Kelly walking us through the images on her slideshow, actually, to ground us in place. We're not able to gather in Southampton, unfortunately, but this show is occasioned by the promise of a show in Southampton, and I feel like it is all about the land and understanding the specific local history. And the work I do on the real estate system really comes out of grounded specific histories, and so I think it would be good to acknowledge the place. And if Kelly, is that something you would be comfortable doing or want to do? I feel like we've seen all your images, and I personally would love the walkthrough for you to tell the story that they hold.
Of course. And before I get into that and answering Tamashi's question too, I just want to first recognize our Shinnecock elders and our ancestors for their persistence and resistance so we can be here to talk about the land claim. I just learned today that a wonderful Shinnecock elder passed away, Beverly Jensen, who served for many years as our tribal communications director, and she really supported me on my legal education journey and advocating for the rights of Indigenous people. So I offer my condolences to her family and pray for their strength as she sets on her journey to the spirit world. And I really wanted to show my appreciation for Tomashi for her interest in the land claim, as it really is the focal point of historic and racial injustice that Shinnecock continues to fight. And I appreciate you, Kesu, and your work that's inspired me to really take a different look, deeper look at the Shinnecock land claim since filing a petition for a writ of certiorari in 2016 to the Supreme Court that I did with my co-counsel, cousin, Tela Troge, and the attorneys at the Native American Rights Fund. And just to get into a history, let me just kind of get to my notes here. And also, I need to recognize another thing that just happened yesterday before I get into it. With the United States Supreme Court and their decision to uphold reservation lands in Oklahoma, it's really huge. There has been since 2005 a case that has really harmed Indian tribes for sovereignty purposes, and it's really just supposed to be for land claims, but they try to stretch it out to sovereignty issues as well for tribal jurisdiction. It's called City of Sherrill v. United Indian Nation in 2005, and it was actually that Justice Ginsburg wrote the majority for that. And what she did was really create something like a death knell for Indian land claims. And really it concerns the disruptiveness to settled expectations of current non-Indian landowners. I was afraid that in this case with Oklahoma, that given what Justice Thomas had said, kind of saying that it's possible that this disruptiveness and settled expectations could go beyond land claims, that it could also impact the Choctaw and in Oklahoma and the Creek Indian Nation. And thankfully, Justice Ginsburg went on the right side and voted in favor with Justice Gorsuch. I wish Justice Gorsuch was on the Supreme Court when Shinnecock put in their claim, but unfortunately not. We only had 8 and they didn't decide to review our claim. But, you know, Justice, I think, Roberts actually, you know, still upheld or he dissented in the Oklahoma case, saying that the court reaches the opposite conclusion only by disregarding the well-settled approach that has been set by the precedent. And you know that he was referring to what Justice Ginsburg decided in the Sherrill case. And so since then, since 2005, we've really not been able to pursue, there's like 5 other tribes who've tried in the lower courts, in the Second Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. And, you know, it's just gotten worse and worse, and they dismiss tribal land claims regardless of whether tribes seeking ejectment of landowners or monetary damages or declaratory relief. And there's no application or test of latches. That's what it's called. It's really the new latches that's very prejudicial to just tribes to show, okay, what are the inequities? Is it did the state actually have unclean hands? Yes, in these cases. And the role of the sovereigns in the case and what the previous court precedent actually is. So when I open up my kind of images, my question is like, okay, so this is what the Supreme Court says, but what about the expectations of Shinnecock Indians? And what about the disruptiveness of the Shinnecock people who have lived and stewarded this land since time immemorial? So in this first slide, I have a mural that my mother made, Denise Silva Dennis, and also a map by David Martin, both Shinnecock tribe members. And it shows the 13 tribes of Long Island on the bottom. And in that red box is where Shinnecock is situated on Long Island. And that's our Aboriginal and territory that we had the whole of. And we're situated between the Unkachags to the west of us and the Montaukett to the west of us. And the mural above depicts just a beautiful, it's on our community center. It's how we had the water's bounty for fishing, harvesting, sell fish, and seaweed. Seaweed is key. You'll see later. It's very important, not only to us, but also the colonists coming through. And for utilizing wampum, shell fashioning technique. I'm wearing some now. And it also shows how we were skilled whalers who traveled on voyages far from our homelands. And the colonists really saw that and took us even further because of our expertise. Other than fishing and hunting, we had traditional agricultural practices that Tomashi is interested in, with corn and beans and gathering berries from the abundance of bushes we have on our shores. And we would also dig for ground nuts and tubers. And we were also a matriarchal society with women leader sachems. We called sunk squaws. And so we can go to the next slide. So our lives were disrupted and so were our settled expectations in 1640. And that's how this is a portion, this map is the 1797 New York State Archives map survey of Southampton town, a portion of it that was in the 1703 Indian Reserve. It's and so that shaded area you see there includes the Shinnecock Hills, Savonic, where the golf courses are now, and to the south you see the Shinnecock Great Neck, and that's actually the Shinnecock Reservation where we live today, about 800 acres. So there's a series of questionable land transactions before this map was created. And that started right in 1640 when the Shinnecock, shortly after Shinnecock met the English settlers who first arrived by ship at North Sea Harbor at a place called Conscience Point, and that's where the movie is called Conscience Point. So in that very first transaction, the deed, that deed in 1640 actually founded the town of Southampton in 1640, and it was traded for 16 coats and corn, and promised that the colonists would defend Shinnecock from violence. And let's keep in mind that in 1937, the colonists had already massacred 500 Pequots in Connecticut. So, sorry, 1637 is when the massacre had occurred. So conflicts over these transactions escalated, and Southampton townsmen would drive their cattle and livestock and would prohibit Shinnecock from our agricultural practices of digging ground nuts and tubers, since their cattle would fall into these ditches that we had. And they would actually impose a penalty on us by public humiliation and whipping, and that started in 1654. So there was this agricultural bias with herding townsmen and their animals, and Shinnecock would get angry every time hogs and pigs would come up and destroy Shinnecock clan beds, and their cattle and sheep would trample over our cornfields. And in 1649, actually, the town pretty much said that, okay, Shinnecock, if you are this upset, you're going to have to figure out how to put up fencing and secure your own land, and whatever damage happens to you or to the townsmen is going to be on you. So we were already being put at a disadvantage 9 years later. But the major debt I found, and Kesu, like, I don't know if I would have really read into this too much if it wasn't for your work, was in 1657, Shinnecock as a whole was accused of burning several homes in Southampton Village. How you accuse a whole body of people of doing that is pretty crazy, but they did it. And so Southampton was still part of the colony of Connecticut at that time. And Connecticut sent down a military force and basically threatened us that, you know, unless you want to face the fate like the massacre of the Pequot Indians in 1637, you better get with the program and follow Wyandanch, that they pretty much, he's the Montaukett sachem, but kind of was made the entire sachem of Long Island just to make it convenient for the colonists taking lands. So we had to submit to Wyandanch and just go with whatever kind of transactions he was making. And it was imposed on Shinnecock as well, a fine of 700 pounds to be paid over a period of 7 years, which really was an impossible burden for Shinnecock and an effective way to reduce our autonomy and negotiating power with English. And in that aftermath, Southampton settlers took over more Shinnecock lands over dubious circumstances. It was always fueled with bribes and alcohol as well, like many Indian transactions were throughout the country. And to make matters worse, in 1660, a smallpox epidemic hit the tribes of Long Island. And there's actually an ordinance in East Hampton that states, quote, "No Indian shall come to town upon penalty of paying 5 shillings or be whipped unless they be free of the smallpox." So that was the circumstances in the 1600s. But this map, it shows in 1703 that with all these conflicts happening after the smallpox epidemic still over land and land use, that it was the town who executed for this area a 1,000-year lease for, it's about approximately 5,258 acres, which includes the Shinnecock Hills, the present-day Shinnecock Reservation, and Sabonic, which is to the north, so the northeast. And some have stated that this 1703 lease is really significant, as it constitutes the first Indian reservation in the United States. And a few people really realize that that's a thing. Given that there's just so much of a federal focus on what it is with Native Americans and not the colonial focus. So in 1703, it really confirmed the Shinnecock's rights to the lands in perpetuity. And we continued to reside, hunt, gather our plants, and even beyond the lease area, we did that too. We just did that, and it was in an exchange really to the town to confirm that they had they had the rest of the town of Southampton up to what really was a contested East Hampton boundary, but being able to have that 1703 lease, it just kind of, that's how it made the boundaries of the town of Southampton, really. And so in a quote out of that 1703 lease says, it guaranteed the Shinnecock, quote, "the privileges and advantages of plowing and planting and all other conveniences and benefits whatsoever." So that's pretty good language as far as agreements with Indians go. And yeah, so that's what that map is about. Let's go to the next slide. So this is an 1885 map, and it shows all the carvings of how these proprietors, that I'll get to in a minute, of the undivided lands in and around Southampton were able to take for themselves a lot of the property and actually down the line be at odds with the town itself. You know, the Shinnecock would really continue using their lands and for grazing, and they'd have to adopt a lot of the colonists' agricultural practices, since they were being basically disparaged for doing their own. And so really after the Revolutionary War ended in 1783, and it's no longer Connecticut, but New York, sought aggressively to gain land concessions from Indian tribes. And they were really focused on doing that upstate. And this is despite the 1790 Indian Trade and Intercourse Act, also referred to the Non-Intercourse Act, where it made a restraint on the conveyances with Indian tribes that was continued and recodified and strengthened in 1834. So that, quote, no purchase, grant, or lease, or other conveyances of lands or any title or claim hereto from any Indian nation or tribe of Indians shall be of any validity in law or equity unless the same be made by treaty or convention entered into pursuant to the Constitution. So the state of New York and its political subdivisions really ignored this exclusive authority of the United States Congress over Indians and the prohibitions of the Indian Non-Intercourse Act. And it was in 1818 that the New York legislature actually assigned rights in the common lands on Long Island, in this area, to a corporate group called the Proprietors of the Common and Undivided Lands and Marshes in the town of Southampton. And that's what's really shown on this map. These proprietors, again, were separate from the town itself. And it was this group of proprietors who really began pressuring Shinnecock to sell their lands in the 1820s and even assert claims against them and prohibit Shinnecock tribe members from being able to pasture on their own lands at Shinnecock Neck and other places. They would say horrible things. They would say that we were too mixed with Negro blood to be able to access our own lands that are only for Indians. And this glosses over I wish I could get into more, how Shinnecock people were also enslaved and indentured servants with the Black people in this area. And we're also going on these long whaling voyages, and we're expert whalers, and on these ships we're also Black people and other people. And so yes, we've intermarried with other races, but that doesn't make us any less Shinnecock, and that's something that we still deal with today. And everybody fill up your census form. You are Shinnecock. Let's go to the next slide. So in 1836, this is a 1836 Colton and Smith map, and this map goes to show that Shinnecock were actually living west a lot in the parts of Hampton Bays and that Canoe Place, where we still hold about 80 acres. It's a little west of where the Shinnecock Canal is right now. It's not on this map yet because it wasn't created yet, but it's there, about a little sliver. We could drag the canoes across, and that's what we did, but it was a point of portage for our canoes. And sometimes, we would move up through other areas of the Shinnecock Hills and into Sabonic, where the golf courses are now, and in our summer areas. And so we were all, depending on what our needs were, we were moving from place to place within this area. And that's how we didn't have the kind of understanding that we couldn't be doing that. So that's what we just continue to do. Next slide. So we even had a church, a chapel in Hampton Bays, and it's actually being rebuilt now. If you don't go down the road a little bit toward Rumba, that restaurant. But where it was originally is actually the resting place of Reverend Paul Cuffey, a Shinnecock who died in 1812. And his resting place is now disturbed several times a day by the Long Island Railroad. You can see the tracks right next to it. The Long Island Railroad, once it came through in 1870, it just cut through our Shinnecock Hills, and that really have also countless unmarked burials, because that's where on top of our hills where our ancestors' remains were buried. And in the pursuit of the railroad and the development that occurred a lot thereafter, those remains have been human remains have been discarded or placed in museums or put in private collections. And it's something we're fighting for today, to preserve those lands from future development. So next map, or next slide, sorry. So this is the 1859 Chase map. It's a proposal for the Long Island Railroad, and its projected route is much further north than the actual route that happened. But maybe it was to avoid what the planners knew to be Indian lands as much, and try to avoid them as much as possible, and not have to negotiate the right of way with Indians. But I think that really the proprietors just wanted the control of the Shinnecock Hills, and may not have quite contemplated the future with the LIRR quite in 1859, despite this map. And it was really, but interesting, this map, the year 1859 coincides with the same year that the proprietors took it upon themselves to illegally abrogate the 1703 lease that reserved those lands for the Shinnecock. So the proprietors really saw the value of the land for common grazing and seaweed again, and there was all these cases after 1859, 1866, the seaweed cases between the proprietors and the town that I won't get into, but they're really interesting. They wanted to be able to, the seaweed stuff is they wanted to be able to at least have the rights to harvest the seaweed between the Great Peconic Bays and the Shinnecock Bays that are along the Shinnecock Hills, really. So in 1859, the proprietors sought the signatures of Shinnecock Indians to give them the Shinnecock Hills in exchange for fee simple title to the Shinnecock Neck. And that's where the reservation where we live is today. And we still hold that fee simple title as a community. So this was, even though it was the town itself in 1703, which made the lease to Shinnecock. The proprietors really didn't even have the right to abrogate the lease when they hadn't even existed until 1818, but they did it anyway. And they rushed to the New York legislature in Albany to show that they obtained these signatures and that they're getting this land. So I think it was 4,422 acres of Shinnecock land that the legislature just gave, and and that was just for the fee simple ownership of the Shinnecock Neck. You can go to the next slide. So in this 1873 Beers map is also coincides with this Newsday article snippet from Steve Madden in 1988. And it shows the railroad going through, and the colonial powers just, they just did their thing, even though in 1859 the agreement was fraudulent and made forcefully, and they didn't stop with Shinnecock. They did it to the Montaukett too. You can see it a little bit on the newspaper clipping, and they moved the Montaukett people actually to Freetown to be with the freed enslaved Black people, and would not let them back to their own area, claiming that they had been intermarried, or they married too much with people outside Indians. So they wouldn't even hear their claims either. Next slide. So this is what the reservation looked like. It's very different from what you would see in the William Merritt Chase beautiful paintings of the Shinnecock Hills. But this is a picture of the Shinnecock Neck and the few houses that existed shortly after the 1859 lease, or 1859 agreement abrogated the 1703 lease. Some of the whalers were able to save up some money, but a lot of the Shinnecock whalers also fell into indentured servitude from all the debt that they got from the voyages. But you can see how it was so important in 1859, 3 months later, 3 months after making the agreement, that the Shinnecock knew that they had to immediately try to find redress for this and try to explain to everyone that it was wrong that this occurred. And so they put in this complaint, and they were able to find an attorney to support them. and saying that the signatures were forced. This is the handwritten complaint that's right here, made in 1859, 3 months after again, saying that the signatures were procured by undue influence, they were forged, and there was oppressive conduct and threatenings. And the complaint even states that the Shinnecock wanted to continue the right to manage their own business without being under control, to have right to possess the seaweed that drifts over our shores and the lands. That shows how valuable it really was for fertilizer and things. But most importantly, the complaint said that the conveyance was made really in 1703 for 1,000 years, was really a conveyance in fee simple of the Shinnecock Hills to the Shinnecock Indians in exchange for a confirmation deed to the settlers that quitclaimed all the lands of Southampton town and the Shinnecock. And so really the Shinnecock were and are, continue to be, the absolute owners in the conveyance. And that's for the entire, that second slide I showed for the Shinnecock Hills and that area. And of course, again, under the Non-Intercourse Act that was strengthened, all of this was completely against that act, and they had no authority to dispose of Shinnecock lands without authorization and consent of Congress. Next slide.
Kelly, just doing a time check, we're at 5:42.
Okay, I'll try to brush through these. So this just shows David Wakas-Bunn. He was the first mate whaler who drowned in the Circassian that happened in 1876, the Circassian shipwreck. And after this, they really started to say, okay, the Shinnecocks are dead. Like, we can just take their lands. It doesn't matter. Let's just forget that they're here. Next slide. And they straight up said it. This picture in 1884 says the last of the Shinnecock Indians, and it's kind of a slap in the face that it's actually a picture that was taken at the celebration of the 15th anniversary of the Long Island Railroad at Shinnecock Hills Station, and it's also known to be the oldest photo of a group of Shinnecock people. But we really never stopped. We continued to exist as Shinnecock people. We're here still. We went to the state legislature to testify multiple times about what had happened and how it was illegal. And we would continue as they even came up to Shinnecock Neck. This is the picture underneath is from 1952. My grandfather's on the right. Lois Hunter, Princess Noadana is wearing her headband to the left. They fought to maintain our lands even at Shinnecock Neck in the Great Cove Real Estate Company case, and they prevailed. And so, we never gave up hope, and we never stopped fighting. So let's go to the next slide. So, and this just shows how there's so much of the Shinnecock Hills that really are sacred to us and need to be preserved. And that's part of the fight that we're doing today. The map that comes out is from the critical environmental area. And that's actually our burial areas. And that's a documented burial area where remains have been found. Next slide. Oh, and it also shows the outline of the area too in gray. That's the entire land claim area. And then this is just an aerial view of that sacred area that's in green and also in blue. But all of the Shinnecock Hills really, we've found to the left and right of it are the remains of our ancestors. Next slide. So this has been our present day, really, continuing to fight. It says, when will we get our Shinnecock Hills back on the bottom? That's from Princess Noadana, who was pictured in that 1950 case it's shown. Next slide. And this is a picture from our 2010 federal recognition. And really, it wasn't until 1970s that we thought we could, okay, really get on top of, again, pursuing our land claim. But when we tried to ask the federal government for assistance, they said, we can't help you unless you get federal recognition status. So for 32 years, we put millions of dollars into trying to obtain this status so they'd help us. And finally in 2010, we did it. So this is a lot of the pictures from that celebration, and also just showing our hope for the future and our hope that things will be better for us. Next slide. And this is what we've kind of been dealing with and doing as an economic endeavor lately. Our Shinnecock monuments, the top says, "Relax and enjoy your stolen land" from Comedy Central. It was a great segment. And so it was a big point of contention for a while, but now the town is actually using our monuments to give out COVID-19 info, and the state who sued us and the Department of Transportation is actually using it too to give out boating courses. So things are evolving. Next slide. And so this is a really powerful image. It's a photo by Daniel Espinoza of a tribal member, Amira Nation, and it just gives me a lot of hope for our future and how much we are intertwined with the rest of the people in the town of Southampton and around us, and everything going on, and how we know how, because of the colonial history, how we in this area, there's so much diversity and yet everyone's segregated. And so at this moment, we're all kind of coming together in the streets of the village of Southampton, showing that we have unity. And that's kind of what I feel like the youth is giving me strength to do. So, and I just want to thank again, everyone, and also people who have come to our aid and really been supportive allies to us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you. There's just never enough time for these conversations. And I look forward to our continuing these conversations when we're not being watched. Kesu, I want to reiterate my earlier question because I think it's important to articulate the language of the gauge as an historic instrument for pledging land, and yeah, and then and of course any responses that you have to Kelly's amazing presentation. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks so much for that, Kelly. I feel like you, even though we're virtual, gave us a sense of place and told us where we were, the occasion for why we are all here together. So thank you for doing that. I also know it was a very abridged history, and that if you really told us about all of the ways that the tribe has been undercut and undermined by the actions of the state and the US and private individuals, that we could be here for days. So I really appreciate this overview for so many reasons. You know, I work on the history of colonization and specifically of land dispossession, and people don't know very much about that in this country for good reason. The narratives have been written to erase that history. They have been written as if this land was vacant and tribes were not here, erasing these centuries now long complex stories of dispossession that you've given us some of the outline for in Southampton. It happened over a really long time, and it was different everywhere, and there is a local story of people who have struggled and fought to maintain their claims over the centuries against all odds everywhere. And I really hope that people understand that there's not a place in this country that they can go where there isn't a story of its own to learn of the people who were there and continue to maintain a connection to their homelands and have faced a more complex and Byzantine set of legal challenges and personal challenges and violence over the centuries than you can imagine. So for all of those reasons, I thank you for that, because it's something that in my work I want people to remember. Tomashi is asking about the gauge. And before I get there, I just want to say that I do think a lot about the real estate system and how it was put together and how it was formed. And it feels so important to remember that it is this very history that Callie has shared with us, this history, which, as I said, happened in some variation, some very different variation everywhere that you could possibly go here, that leads to the Shinnecock land claim, to the Creek land claim, to the Choctaw land claim, but also to every land claim. It leads to settlers' land claims. It changed property law itself. It determined the structure of the very real estate market that is also on view. So Callie invited us to a screening of this film, Conscience Point. It's incredible. It's an incredible teaching tool. It's an incredible film in its own right that tells the story of the struggle now in Southampton. And one thing that is really on view there is the real estate behemoth in the Hamptons that the tribe has to struggle against now. Luxury homes worth $10 million a piece, easily second and third homes. This is not sustenance. This is pure speculation, right? This is a world, a playground for the rich to park money, to have a second, third home, import their labor. There's a part of the film that describes the labor that comes in from the city, migrant brown labor, day after day, congesting all the roads in that part of Long Island in order to serve these people in their playground, essentially, their speculative real estate playground. And it is exactly the value of that land now through that kind of speculation that poses probably the greatest challenge that the tribe faces. It's the sheer amount of monetary value that's been invested there that people hope to gain from buying and selling that land, that makes it so difficult to take that land back, which is ultimately the aim everywhere, right? The land back. But that land is worth millions and millions and millions to very powerful players in the area, and that will be very hard to contend with, as it is everywhere. Although the land there is particularly expensive and particularly an extreme example of the kind of speculation I'm talking about, the entire US real estate market constructs land in that form. The enclosure everywhere, the private enclosure everywhere, your house, my house, you know, anywhere that we really have an option to live now in this country, land is constructed as an asset, primarily, as an object of speculation. Mortgages are held, are created in order to buy and sell them, and those mortgages are now the primary commodity in the real estate market. And it does all stem from this history of colonization. So now finally, Tomashi, I'm getting to your question about the gauge. Gauge, you know, is part of the word mortgage, the gauge. There's a part of the article where I talk about the distinction between the vifgage and the mortgage. It's old, it's ancient, it's now obsolete, but essentially it referred to whether or not the fruits and the rents of the land that you could collect during the period of the loan itself diminish the loan, or whether the loan stays constant and that's extra. This was really important at a time when interest was prohibited as a form of usury. Imagine that. Can you even imagine a world now in our debt leveraged lives where interest was prohibited by the church as a form of usury? There was such a time. And in fact, before the colonization of America, many cultures, most cultures everywhere, as far as I can tell, all over the world, had some practice where they did secure loans with land, something like the mortgage that we're familiar with today. It was called various things, not always a gauge. It was called a hipoteca, which determines the word for it, and Spanish and other Romance languages. They seem to have had something like a mortgage in China. They had them in Korea, where my family is from. They had them everywhere. But in all of these arrangements, it was as in England in the medieval period, as Tomashi described, foreclosure was almost unthinkable. So the idea of actually forcing a family from the land for non-payment of a debt was essentially off the table. In all of these arrangements, you had agreements for interests that don't exist today. Someone could take possession of your fields and reap the harvest and profit from that until you had repaid the loan. Somebody could move into your house and live there until you had repaid the loan. There were all of these kind of usufructual and temporary arrangements that it's hard to imagine, right? Moving into someone's house until they pay you back and then you give them back your house, but that is how things used to work. The idea of actually dispossessing a family of land, a clan of land, a people of their land, and casting them out to be landless upon the earth was inconceivable. It was just not on the horizon until the British colonization project. And I've done a fair amount of research to look at other European colonial powers that also had something like the mortgage. The Dutch mortgaged land, for example. But it was only the English who used the mortgage against native peoples in order to dispossess them of lands. And this happened quite early. It happened about as soon as the English arrived on the eastern seaboard. It happened in Virginia and up and down the eastern seaboard, that essentially they would manufacture debts, more deliberately sometimes than not, but there were debts that were manufactured, and then a claim was made on the land in the form of a mortgage that was then foreclosed as repayment for the debt. And so that kind of longer history of that shift and how that happened is a story I'm trying to tell. I've told it in various pieces. The piece that Tomashi read from is the first piece. I'll have a follow-up chapter coming out later this year, and I'm working on another article about the longer story. I don't think we have time for me to tell it right now. I see that we're almost a few minutes to the hour, but I did just want to emphasize in response to Tomashi's question that was the massive shift that utterly changed what a land market was. The land market, upon this transformation of the mortgage in the 17th and then consolidated in the early 18th century, became the center of the entire market. And that was never the case before anywhere else on earth, I want to say. Never was the land market, never was land treated as a commodity that could be bought and sold like chattel, such that the land market itself became the mainstay of the entire economy. That was not the main way that people made money, was to buy and sell land. They did it in other ways. They bought and sold food, other kinds of goods, but not land. And that world that was created at that time is the one we live in still, which goes directly to Tomashi's concerns about stability and safety. It is very hard to provide safety and stability for people where homes are so precarious that people don't know if they're going to continue to be able to pay the rent or their mortgage, obviously heightened by the COVID crisis, but even before this, right? The entire structure has grown more and more precarious, and everyone has seen the rising rents and the skyrocketing values of real estate all over the country that have forced people from their homes. What we're seeing is the logic of that moment played out over centuries, reaching unsustainable heights. That is the world that was created through colonization. That's the world we live in still. So that's something I think about a lot in my practice now as a real estate attorney, foreclosure defense attorney, but also as a scholar and a historian and a writer, trying to uncover that story so that people understand why we live the way we do. History that has been rendered, I think, as invisible as the history of the tribe struggle that Kelly shared with us. So, and it's the same history in many ways. So I'm so glad to be here today with you all talking about it together with Kelly.
Kesu, I want to thank you so much for contextualizing the story that Kelly told, very specific story out here in the Hamptons. I would like to ask a question that we got from Terry Sultan, and I would, in that instance, recognize Terry, our recent director of the Parrish, who really believed in this project from the beginning. So thank you, Terry. I hope you're still watching. Her question is to Kelly: with the new Supreme Court decision regarding Oklahoma have an impact on the Shinnecock Nation in reclaiming land?
Well, it remains to be seen the actual what's going to happen with the Oklahoma and how they've been able to say say that yes, those treaties that the tribes enter into, they save the reservation status of those tribes' lands in Oklahoma for tribal jurisdictional purposes. And it's not a land claim itself. It doesn't change land status, what's happening in Oklahoma. And it's a pretty specific case, but at least, it shows that you can't just disestablish tribal lands. I mean, it's hard for Shinnecock, honestly, to really describe what our land is, because we are one of the, I don't even know if there's other tribes, I don't think there are, who really have a whole reservation that they just own fee simple. And it's not a bunch of allotments or individual Indian lands put in a checkerboard like the situation in Oklahoma among other non-Indian lands. So I know it's definitely helpful, and it's amazing again that Justice Ginsburg ruled the way that she did with Justice Gorsuch in saying that going away from what she had done in the land claim cases, saying that the unsettled expectations we don't want to unsettle the expectations of current landowners and disturb those expectations. We don't want it to be too disruptive to anything that's currently all of the development that's happened to today because of what had happened over 200 or so years ago. And so, yeah, that's that. But going back to what Kesu had said real quick, they did that before the creek, the Muskogee Creek and the Choctaw and the Cherokee were moved from Georgia to Oklahoma in the Trail of Tears. They did that. They went into their homes and they took their homes from them, and non-Indians would live in the Indians' homes that they pushed out. So that's where that happened a lot.
Do we have other audience questions?
Corinne, do you want to select another question? I'm looking for, Kelly, right now I'm looking for the list of Shinnecock focused resources that you sent me so that I can share in the chat. Someone has asked how they can help and be involved now. Okay. And before we close out, we're going a little bit long, everyone. We actually did prepare for this, but only by about like 7 minutes. So we want to close out properly and leave everyone who's still with us with some sort of tangible way to be of service and be of support to the Shinnecock people of Long Island. Corinne, you want to choose another question? There are questions popping up in the chat too.
Yes, so there's one question which I think Kesu pretty much answered, but maybe you want to elaborate more. Is this mortgage foreclosure system particular to the United States at the time, 17th to 18th century and today?
The short answer is yes.
Yeah, I think you pretty much explained that. Do we have any questions in the chat?
I didn't answer really Tomashi's question in the beginning, so just real quick, I wanted to mention how important it is for Shinnecock jurisdiction, tribal jurisdiction, and having our own civil and criminal authority over our lands, and how much we really do serve as a place of respite for people of diverse backgrounds. We have our annual powwow that we invite all to. It's so sad that we won't have it this year because of COVID-19, but we've invited so many people and had so many wonderful cultural exchanges through that. The last few years, we have these really fun rodeos up on the Shinnecock Reservation that have been just like really great for the Latinx community. They don't have anywhere else to go. So they do it on the reservation, and we welcome them to do it, and we're able to make some money off of it too, which is really nice. And you know what? Honestly, if the village of Southampton will not let me do African drumming in the park, so we're gonna take it to the reservation to my grandma's house down the road. So we're here for people, and we face repercussions from that, honestly, because we a lot of us look all different kinds of people, and we are. We come in all shapes and colors, and a lot of us are married to non-Indians, whether you be Black, white, like my husband, and Jewish and Japanese, and Asian, and Hispanic, Latinx as well, and so we're targeted as a community. The police, the town police, really have no authority to come up here, but they'll wait for cars to come off the reservation or try to do hot pursuits up here to get whoever they think might be dealing in something illegal, and they'll wait for us to come off, thinking maybe they can get somebody for something. So, we know it's what the political and racial climate is, and we see it every day.
Thank you, Kelly. I have another question I want to ask Tomashi. Can you talk a little bit about how you will use these discussions for your new body of work? That's from Micah Bozeman from Watermill, and I actually wanted to ask you that question too.
Micah urging me to share secret sauce that he and I will be cooking together when we're reunited. I can say that these conversations are a part of my research methodology that will inspire my image making decisions. There's an image that I shared in the pictures of my work that ran while Corinne was giving her introduction. One particular piece that's called City of Quartz, Wicker Sun is from my recent body of work that showed at Night Gallery. Oh, I didn't shout out my galleries. Thank you to Night Gallery and Tilton Gallery for your continued support. This project began with Tilton Gallery, and now I have teams on both sides of the country looking out for me, and it really makes it possible to do this work. Of course, along with all of the amazing people who are working administratively to allow these projects to continue even during this time. So yeah, I shared that picture because that last body of work is the most personal that I've ever made. It's about democracy, and it's about me and my family. And Kelly, we'll talk more about that piece some other time, but I guess what I'm getting at is image decisions are made, influenced by research and also by intuition. And I'm thinking about this one image that I saw on Instagram that Kelly shared of her and two of her family members when they were children gathered around a toy train set. And it really stuck out to me as something that needed to be involved. The other images that I looked at during our visit with Georgette Greer-Key were these images from the early 1900s, from the late 1800s of Black people in the Hamptons, engaged in, home life, transportation, leisure, and family. So I always think about how seemingly disparate moments in time collapse with each other, and how I can make them intertwine visually. And that also includes video. So I don't actually have all the answers about how this is going to turn out, except I know what I want the paintings. I know how I want the paintings to be structured. I know I want to build them with Ruben Palencia of Los Angeles, who makes my amazing awning shaped stretchers. I know that I want them to be interactive. I know that I want them to project light and color. I know that I want them to surprise me. But these conversations and these relationships that we're building and nurturing, hopefully, will be the things that show up in my dreams and let me know what the images for the painting surfaces, what they need to be. And also, just given what we're dealing with, I've been fantasizing about using sound and video. Actually, I've been thinking about this for a while, thinking about how much I love speaking with Junie and with Bonnie and with Kelly and with Minerva, and imagining the sounds of their voices filling the sparsely occupied Parrish Museum as we re-enter public spaces together and people negotiate what is and is not a safe number of people in a space. So I've been thinking about what it would sound like to hear Junie's voice kind of bouncing off of the walls of the Parrish Museum while people see the paintings. Kelly's voice and whomever else she invites, Tela's voice, bouncing off of the hallways in the space, so that it becomes, I don't know, I wanna offer something in this exhibition that is like a hug, a welcoming back into the space, something that acknowledges what we're all like going through right now, a kindness. And I think that having the opportunity to hear these stories that most of us are missing from our collective understanding of collective memory. Some histories are oral for a reason, because it's really something else to sit back and listen, to sit or walk through and listen to a story be generously told, like Kelly has done for us today, and so is Kesu. So yeah, those are my thoughts about it now. I can't Watermill to come.
Sorry, I can't wait to see that. And I have to say, Tomashi, you're such a generous connector of stories of people, you know, and it shows in your work. And I think that the fact that we have another year basically to work on it makes me very happy, because I think it's going to be a very rich project. I would like to sort of pivot towards the end with one question that came up. What role is the parish playing or thinking of playing in addressing these concerns of access and inequality beyond Tomashi's amazing project? I asked this as a museum insider. That's a very good question. And I think the fact that Tomashi was able to come here and meet with so many people is because the parish has built a lot of relationships and will continue to do so with all the different communities that we serve. And I really feel we have to serve everybody here in this area. And it's a very, very complex, and somebody said very segregated area. And I really want the parish to be a hub for all these voices to be heard, both from the inside, but also from the outside. So meaning artists, but also changing the face of the parish so that we also reflect the community more. So these are my sort of ending words. And Tomashi, is there anything else you would like to say before we end? And I really want to thank Kelly Dennis and Kesu Park for your generosity to be with us tonight and for participating in this project.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all and thank you, Victor, the unseen hand, guiding us through tech. The chat is blowing up. I just wanted to acknowledge that the chat is blowing up. It's really great to see so many people that I care about that I haven't been able to see during these 4 months of isolation. Serge, you know I'm talking about you.
We will be back online in September, so stay tuned. There will be more conversations with Tomashi.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note that this is only the beginning of the story. So Corinne and I were able to have to facilitate a Friday nights live focused on my work, my method, and then this is really just the beginning of facilitating discussion around the land claim. We have other members of other communities on Long Island that we have been in conversation with and that we hope to bring into this process, so that we have an expanded archive of real discourse that is historic and contemporary and acknowledges lives that are often disappeared in the space. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to download this chat because it is jumping. And when we leave here, I won't be able to read it. Lastly, before we close, I dropped in a number of opportunities to support the Shinnecock people that Kelly told me about. Here it is. There's a fundraiser for Ma's House Restoration and BIPOC Artist Studio. Kelly's brother, Jeremy Dennis, launched it like a month ago or so. And the picture that I was describing was of Kelly and her cousins playing with a toy train set at Ma's House that the fundraiser supports. You can learn more about the fundraiser project for Ma's House Restoration and BIPOC Artist Studio at www.gofundme.com /artisthouseFund. It's in there. Please don't miss out on this opportunity to be of service.
We can post all this on the website once the talk is posted. We're recording this, so we can also post everything that Kelly has sent us in the chat.
Oh, awesome. Because I'm sweating trying to get it all in.
I see that.
I want to
Thank you, everyone.
thank everyone for being
Good night.
with us. It's 6:15, so we're actually right on time. Kelly, oh, let me take a picture of that. Don't move, Kelly, don't move.
Oh.
I like escaped.
Tricky business.
Yeah.
But
I hope that we can continue to stand together and acknowledge what has been untaught, learn what needs to be learned, so that we can stand in unity in the rising tide of new knowledge that we're gaining in these conversations. Thank you, everyone. Oh,
Good night.
good night.
Bye.